Republican President Donald Trump left the White House after a tumultuous 4 years in office, and Democrat Joe Biden has assumed the presidency in a country beset by deep political divides while ravaged by a raging coronavirus pandemic. In this edition of the debate, we will look at what the 46th U.S. president will do that will be different than what Trump has done, and whether what that would spell both domestically and abroad. Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, Daniel Shaw is an activist and academic who joins us from New York. We also have Margaret Kimberley, co-founder of Black Agenda Report, joining us from New York. I'd like to welcome you both. Daniel Shaw, let me first start with you. So Trump is out and Biden is in. What has Trump left behind, and how will he be remembered after these 4 tumultuous years as president?
Well, the ruling class wants to blame everything on Trump, but what we're talking about here is how many centuries of white supremacy, of inequality, of class rule, of nepotism, of everything that U.S. capitalism and imperialism represent. Trump definitely played into that and tapped into that. But though Trump may go away, as he has his private send-off today, trying to take away energy from the 46th inauguration, it's clear that the phenomenon of Trump and systematic segregation in the society and inequality, and of course U.S. imperialism, U.S. aggression around the world, whether it's Trump in the driver's seat or Biden as the chief CEO of U.S. capitalism, Obama, Bush, Clinton, it's the same system with the same nefarious intentions towards the peoples of the world. So I think many people have a sense of relief right now, but I would caution against that sense of relief because the struggle continues.
Well, talk about struggle. Let me ask you, Margaret Kimberley, when you take a look at the setting of where this took place, 25,000 national security guards, you got thousands of local police and security forces, barbed wires, security checkpoints all over the place in Washington, D.C., in a city that's under a lockdown because of COVID-19, but also because of the violence and protest that perhaps was anticipated. And some have called this worse than the Green Zone in Baghdad, with the combined security forces of Iraq and Afghanistan in terms of presence of U.S. forces. Doesn't that give it a different take on the situation, looking at it from that angle?
Well, yes, it does. It's very different from any other inauguration. Inauguration is a big public event, and the public are free to go onto the grounds of the Capitol and watch from a distance. It's a very big event for the nation, and it's quite different to have an inauguration with troops instead of ordinary people. But as soon as someone talks about the numbers of troops in Washington as opposed to Afghanistan and Iraq, I say to myself, well, that's proof that we can take those troops back home. But yes, 2 weeks ago, there was the riot in the Capitol, and we had a President Trump who, unlike any of his predecessors, did not attend the inauguration of his successor. Even those who are defeated usually have the grace to do that. But Trump was contesting the election up until a couple of weeks ago, so he would not attend. And that gives Biden there's a lot of positive feeling for him, but I caution people to remember this is still a president of the United States. He will do what other presidents do, and the fact that you didn't like Trump or you're glad Trump is gone does not mean that you can just let all caution go and engage in wishful thinking about what Biden will do as president.
Well, Daniel Shaw, we're well aware up to a point of the deep problems that the U.S. has domestically. You know, we're looking at a divided nation that's been reiterated time and again. You have the racial inequality and injustice that has happened in the U.S., which has reached boiling point. You have an economy that's ravaged by the pandemic, loss of jobs, unemployment, etc. As deep as a problem and challenge that poses the U.S. president, there is problems that he has to deal with outside of the U.S., and we could talk about West Asia. Just initially looking at the depth of these two huge challenges, how could he tend to both in order to fix the problems? because you can't take your time fixing one and let the other bleed.
Yes, yes, that's an important point. And as Margaret mentioned, with so much internal discord, similar to 1968 and 1969 when the United States was on the brink of a revolution, as well as France and other capitalist countries, how can Trump's parting shots be to put more sanctions on Venezuela, put Cuba on a terrorist list, try to hike up more aggression against China and Iran, when here at home, Jim Crow segregation continues to reign. Every single day there's a new record for total amount of COVID deaths. There's an average of 4,300 deaths every day. We've now topped a total of 400,000 deaths. So it's very telling. Dr. Martin Luther King, whose birthday we celebrated yesterday, and his legacy, a legacy that didn't just include nonviolence, but included anti-imperialism, precisely why he was assassinated, because he was able to connect these domestic and international struggles. How can it be that the priorities of this country continue to be to recolonize large swaths of the world that they can't control, where the principal wealth of the world is in South America and in Asia and in Africa? We see AFRICOM, ever-expanding military bases and U.S. military presence. So it would be very delusional to think that now that Trump is gone, that all of these problems of imperialism and looking for domination over the world have suddenly disappeared. So to quote Dr. King, this nation is in sore need of a revolution in terms of its priorities.
Well, Margaret, Kimberley, a lot of talk on Biden, but let's focus a little bit about Kamala Harris. Of course, the first woman president for the U.S. Woman power, that's a good thing. We can see the elevation that has taken place in terms of recognition for that position for a woman. Do you think that as this presidency of Biden continues throughout the days and months to come, that a lot of focus will be on Kamala Harris and to see how she can help fix some of the problems that the U.S. is experiencing?
Well, it will be interesting to see how much power she has as vice president. You know, traditionally, that is a position that is really does not have very much influence. A lot of people who want to run for president themselves serve as vice presidents. Our Constitution calls for this backup position, if you will, in case the president should be incapacitated or pass away while in office. But vice presidents usually don't have a lot of say. So it'll be interesting to see what Biden will do. Sometimes their vice presidents are the point person for a particular issue. Biden was the point person after the U.S. assisted a coup in Ukraine. So it'll be interesting to see how much power, how much influence she's going to have in the administration. That's open to question. And I despite the historic nature, the first female vice president, the fact that she is not white, all of those are things that make for a lot of press attention. But as we've seen with Obama, the fact that she is of African ancestry does not mean necessarily anything good for us. We can expect Biden and Harris to operate pretty much the way other Democratic presidents have operated.
Daniel Shaw, one of the things that was said time and again throughout the inauguration by different speakers, especially in the beginning, was the word democracy. And of course, they elaborated more on how democracy in the U.S. is broken. How do you think that's going to play on the international arena, where the U.S. is used to dictate to other countries that they're not promoting democracy in their countries when the U.S. itself has a broken democracy?
Yeah, listening to this 46th inauguration speech by Biden and the entire performance there with Jennifer Lopez and the Star-Spangled Banner and the Pledge of Allegiance, it's the same rhetoric, it's the same hollow terms. They've used this word democracy every time that they have bombed Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, every time they've waged secret, dirty wars against Argentina and Uruguay and Central America and Syria, and an assault on Iranian self-determination for 4 decades now. So we see right through the word democracy. The question is, whose democracy? When they talk about democracy, they're talking about bourgeois democracy, democracy for the 0.001%. They're not talking about democracy for the 85 million people of Iran or the 30 million people of Venezuela or for the 1.4 billion people of China. What they mean by their democracy is foreign rule and foreign conquest over these massive markets. They're very afraid of any South-to-South unity. That's what China ultimately represents. It represents alternative markets, alternative investment capital for the Bolivarian camp, for the blockaded and sanctioned countries. This great democracy, in quotation marks, that Joe Biden and Trump have talked about so much, has submitted 1/4 of the world's people to cruel, humiliating sanctions and blockades to try to bend their will. So I think we're all deeply indebted to the everyday people of Iran, of Cuba, of Venezuela, of Nicaragua, who continue to pave a different way forward for all of humanity. So whether it's Biden or Trump, they are dead set on U.S. unipolarity. There may be this or that nuance or difference or different tactics with respect to Cuba or Iran, but the end goal is the same, and that's total submission with puppet governments in Tehran, in Havana, in Caracas, in Beijing, which they'll never get because every day the world is more multipolar at this point.
All right, looking inside, Margaret, Kimberley, some of the phrases that I picked up from the speech by Joe Biden when he was inaugurated: cry for racial justice will be met. He also said white supremacy, extremism, and domestic terrorism. We will rise to that challenge. These are 2 huge challenges. Tell us how you think he will tackle them.
Well, I think he'll tackle them in the ways most Democrats do, by appointing certain prominent black people to high office. That's already begun. Saying all the right things about racism in the United States, but not really tackling the foundational aspect of anti-black racism here. And as far as domestic terrorism, I am frankly concerned. 2 weeks ago, all the rioters in the Capitol can be prosecuted under laws we already have. We have to be very careful about this call for domestic terrorism legislation. I'm afraid it will not be turned against the kind of people who drove into the Capitol on January 6th, but against people like me, against people of color, against the left. That is what happened with the Patriot Act. It actually expanded surveillance against the entire country. The NSA has records of all our electronic communications, all of us, whether we're under any investigation or not. In effect, we all are. So we don't need another Patriot Act. We don't need any anti-terrorism legislation. Everything they did was illegal under current law, and all they have to do is prosecute people who violate those laws. This is a time that we have to think more deeply. And there was a cry for those people to be treated severely, but we have to stop and think about what that means, what it is we really want, and what it is that this system does and whom it attacks.
Listening to him and many other speeches, Daniel Shaw, that now the U.S. president has made, Joe Biden, there's not a real sense of urgency behind a concise plan of action that he has for resolving problems. Yet we see that on his first day, he has said that 15 executive actions are going to actually get executed. The Muslim majority travel ban is going to be lifted. He hasn't said all the countries yet. Also, the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement is going to be reversed, the World Health Organization membership, etc. Do you think that he will be a man to just roll back Trump's policies the way Trump did with Obama's, or that he's going to bring something new to the table aside from just reversing some of these Trump policies that Trump enacted?
Yeah, Joe Biden is the opposite of bold. Joe Biden is a 47-year-old typical spineless Democrat, a Washington insider. He represents the very antithesis of change. He may, of course, overturn, he pledges to overturn 17 executive actions to overturn Trump policies in his first day. But that will tinker with the system. These will be small, reformist, incremental things. Not to say that they're not significant, not to say that ending this travel ban, not to say that increased rights for DACA recipients, all these things are, of course, significant. But at the same time, it would be delusional if we thought for a second that Joe Biden did not represent business as usual. In fact, the ruling class has spoken, and Joe Biden is the person that they chose to steady the ship. All factions of the ruling class united against Bernie Sanders, against the Justice Democrats, against anything that would represent any type of true change. It really brings me back to Malcolm X's quote when he says, "We don't want your crumbs. We want a bakery in which to make our own bread." So Joe Biden is the antithesis of any sense of self-determination for the communities that Margaret has mentioned there, the most oppressed communities. So the movement is going to have to be more vigilant than ever, more mobilized than ever. Let's not forget that under Barack Obama's 8 years, what happened to Libya, the dirty war against the Syrian people. Look what happened in Honduras to Zelaya. Look what happened in Paraguay to Lugo. Look at the lawfare campaigns, warfare through judicial and legislative means against Dilma Rousseff and Lula in Brazil. So the movement both at home here in the U.S. and internationally has to be on guard to fight against these Dixiecrats, as Malcolm X correctly labeled the Democrats.
Well, Margaret, Kimberley, in some of the parting words by the U.S. President before he went to his residence in Florida, he said, quote, "We will be back in some form," promising, obviously, or alluding to the fact that, well, let me ask you, what is he alluding to? If he's addressing his fan base, then he's got a lot on his plate. Joe Biden has a lot on his plate when you take a look at what happened with the storming of the Capitol Hill. You got those types of people who are still pro-Trump. If that still persists, the presence of the Trumpism, isn't that just going to prevent Biden from advancing to try to solve this racial divide or this deep divide that the U.S. has?
Well, it depends on Biden's determination. He won. He won not just the electoral college, but the popular vote as well, a huge turnout. He has a mandate to do what his voters want him to do. This idea that he has to heal a divide, I think is somewhat spurious. He has to govern. And there are things that the people want, that people want him to do. People want Medicare for all. He made some remark about improving access to health care. As you may know, Americans have this healthcare system that's controlled by the private sector. Millions of people are not cared for. Excuse me. And we need Medicare, the system for the elderly, for everybody. A system that most people like and think serves their needs. So that's the kind of things that he needs to undo. We have this terrible system where young people go into debt to go to college and university. He has to forgive those loans, raise the minimum wage. All he has to do is meet the people's needs. That will heal the divide. You know, one of the reasons I believe that Trump has an appeal with so many people is that those people don't get their needs met either. And I'm not saying they would necessarily change those opinions, but the people who stormed the Capitol would still use Medicare for all if they had it. So we need a system that works in the interest of the people. And this past year, with the COVID pandemic, it's exposed how badly the system works and how little it does serve the needs of the people. We need a bigger stimulus. He claimed there would be a $2,000 payment during the elections, and now we're told it's only going to be $1,400. as opposed to other countries which have ongoing support for people during this pandemic period. So I think we need to pay less attention to this talk of him healing and bringing people together. He is supposed to govern, and he is supposed to meet the needs of people who voted for him. That is what we should be looking for.
Okay, I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't, but I'm sure we'll be back with this topic again. Thank you very much, Daniel Shaw, activist and academic. A pleasure. And Margaret Kimberley there, co-founder of the Black Agenda Report. Thank you for your comments from New York. That does it for this edition of The Debate. From me, Kavitapwe, the entire team is goodbye. Until next time.